Hey, so I'm Torri, and you probably already knew that because you're at my thesis, and why else would you be here, right? We're a bit selfish. Okay, let's move on. Have you seen the weather recently? It's been crazy, right? Here, hold this for me. It's been crazy. There's been volcanoes exploding on the Big Island. There's been, a little while ago, did you know that in the Netherlands, there's 90-mile-an-hour wind gusts? 90-mile wind gusts, that's insane. You could be walking down the street, your hat flies off, you've never seen that hat again, it's gone. You could be walking your dog down the street, dog, gone, sorry. Do you know that because of wind gusts, there'll be a shortage, there'll be an increase in orange juice prices? Well, not really just wind gusts, more like a devastating hurricane than just a mere wind gust, but it's beside the point. California a little while ago, there was a hurricane that swept through and destroyed a plethora of orange trees. Plethora, that's a fun word. Destroyed a plethora of orange trees. It meant there was a scarcity of oranges. It meant that the orange juice prices had to skyrocket because there's a scarcity. And it's just quite a shame because I do love orange juice. Especially with pulp. My friend says he doesn't like pulp. Something about him having to do an experiment in middle school with pulp and arteries. I have no idea what I'd do with arteries. What was I talking about again? Have you ever tried to hold a conversation with a friend whose train of thought has clearly derailed? The energetic, off-the-wall, crazy friend who will begin passionately describing his love for orange juice when the conversation had originally been about the weather? I am that friend. It has been pointed out to me many times I am the friend and son who drives his other friends and mother crazy sometimes. These unfocused individuals are commonly struggling with symptoms of ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactive disorder. A common misconception about ADHD is that it is a learning disability, whereas science has shown that it is a medical condition that affects the parts of the brain, rather than it being just a processing problem. Through SPECT, or single photon emission computerized tomography, which are brain scanning techniques, scientists have discovered that in children and adults with ADHD, there tends to be an underactivity in the frontal areas of the brain. The prefrontal cortex controls many aspects of daily life, such as impulse control, focus, planning, and ignoring distractions. The most fitting portrayal of this disorder came from my pastor, who, while speaking about his recently diagnosed attention deficit disorder, he described it as having ADOS. ADOS stood for attention deficit. Ooh, shiny. When individuals with this disorder try to concentrate, the prefrontal cortex activity actually decreases rather than increases as it does in the normal brains. This decrease in activity affects the blood flow and the level of dopamine in the brain. The resulting behavior includes daydreaming, careless mistakes, and restlessness, to name just a few. Being in a room full of academics and linguists, I'm sure you can understand how this could affect the daily life of a student. Many students benefit from some kind of accommodation in class. What are educational accommodations? An accommodation is simply an adjustment, usually small and easy, that a teacher makes so that everyone in the classroom is able to learn and do their best. Most often this means they teach in a way that works for both auditory and visual learners. Though ideally they also teach in a way that works for kinesthetic or experiential learners as well. If a teacher's job is to set a student up to succeed, then the teacher has to consider learning differences. I was surprised to learn from a well-known school administrator that most private schools will not accept any students that have a diagnosed learning difference. And because of this, most parents will keep their child's situation a secret out of fear that the child will be asked to leave the school. Can you imagine knowing that your child needs certain accommodations, but keeping their situation a secret out of fear? Most accommodations are relatively minor. They do not require money or additional staff, and they do not give any student an unfair advantage. The most common accommodation is to have the child sit closer to the board to help with focus. Of course, education cannot become 100% fair, but schools should do whatever they can within reason to help these students to succeed. Let's delve into some of the background surrounding ADHD. What do we know about this particular learning disorder? For one, we know it is far from being a recent discovery, that research collected on symptoms similar to ADHD can be traced back as far as 220 years ago to Scotland. Those who exhibited behavioral differences in the past were thought to be possessed by demons or deranged. Heinrich Hoffmann, a physician at a mental hospital in Frankfurt, was a pioneer in a line of thought that rejected the idea that all of his patients were possessed. His main contribution to this area was his children's story about Fidgety Phil. It is a story about Phil and his family sitting around a dinner table. The father and mother question whether their son will be able to behave that night, and sit still. Here's a bit of the story. Ready yourself. He wriggled and giggled, and then I declare swung backward and forward and tilted his chair, just like any old rocking horse. Philip, I'm getting cross. See, the naughty, restless child, still growing more rude and wild, his chair falls over quite. Philip screams with all his might, catches at the cloth, but then that makes matters worse again. Down upon the ground they fall, glasses, bread knives, forks and all. How Mama did fret and frown when she saw them tumbling down, and Papa made such a face. Philip is in sad disgrace. For many with ADHD, this may seem like a familiar scenario. Many students who exhibit signs of ADHD may seem to be rowdy or disorderly, and Fidgety Phil shows many of the symptoms associated with ADHD and its story, such as hyperactivity and impulsivity. Today, psychiatrists use the story of Fidgety Phil as an allegory to inform families of the behaviors of ADHD. The man who began to lay the scientific groundwork for ADHD was Dr. George Still, the father of British pediatrics. Still presented a series of lectures where he made his first historical descriptions of early ADHD. He described his patients as children with a defect of moral control without a general impairment of intellect. And in recent studies, it's been confirmed that the IQ of children with ADHD is within the normal range of children of the same age group, which means that these students aren't stupid. They're just really distracted. Many of his other observations also continue to hold true today. He noticed that there tended to be more boys than girls who exhibited signs of ADHD. This boy-to-girl imbalance still holds true today with a diagnosis ratio of 3:1. He also found many cases that coincide with our modern research, such as difficulty with impulsivity and delaying gratification. The most common diagnosis for ADHD is not determined by a physical, a mental, or a genetic test, but rather through a diagnostic evaluation. Concerned parents will bring their children in to see a psychologist. These psychologists will then ask the parents and teachers how the child behaves at home and at school. They'll ask questions such as, do they have trouble focusing even if they're directly being spoken to? Do they forget to do things often? Do they rarely complete an activity before moving on to the next? My test sheet consisted of many check marks. Sadly, there is no cure for ADHD. There's only treatments to manage the symptoms. It is not a virus or a tumor that is removable with a surgical procedure. However, there are multiple strategies families can turn to in order to decrease the level of, to decrease the symptoms in their kids. Stimulant medication like Ritalin or methylphenidate, which work by releasing hormones into the brain, is very common. However, a child can develop sleep problems, increased blood pressure, and headaches as a side effect. Natural remedies can help to decrease these symptoms and can work really well with the right medications to help children overcome these obstacles. It can really help to avoid certain food additives and food allergens that can trigger the symptoms of ADHD. Watching one's diet and having a regular exposure to nature has also been proven to decrease the symptoms of ADHD kids. Outdoor activities and physical activity in general is healthy and decreases the signs of symptoms. But perhaps the most vital part of the management puzzle are the various forms of parent education and counseling families can turn to in order to better understand the disorder and assist their children. Proper medication, along with lifestyle changes and support at home and at school, can make a big difference and can help a student to realize their full potential. Students spend at least 40 hours per week at school, and most schools are not designed for kids who are easily distracted and have trouble focusing. It is strange that institutions that are targeted for learning are the ones who seem to not want to help these children. Unless they focus in on specialized education, schools, especially private schools, tend to try to avoid having to deal with kids with ADHD and learning disabilities. Although education for those with moderate to severe mental and physical handicaps can cost quite a bit of money as well as utility, this is not the case for minor learning differences. The Education for All Handicapped Children Act was enacted in 1975. This act required all schools that accepted federal funds to provide equal access to education for children with physical and mental disabilities. However, private schools do not have to abide by this act simply because they do not accept federal funds. Some schools want to keep their impressive test scores up, so they do not want to accept applicants who do not test well or who change the homogeny of the student body. Private schools sometimes do not have the funding, the faculty, or the facilities to handle for students with severe handicaps. Students with minor learning differences, though, can succeed in a school with very reasonable help, some grace, and understanding. The purpose of education, according to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. If a student is unable to do this due to a school system that withholds reasonable accommodations, the goal of education fails. For this reason, private schools should consider to integrate these classroom accommodations into their teaching. Besides, in the real world, which we are constantly being told we are being prepared for, we'll have to live and work with a variety of different people. Why not learn to work with these types of people in school? Students and teachers will both benefit from the necessary flexibility that comes with helping every student to succeed. Accommodations do not change what a child is taught. Rather, they change how a child is taught. And these accommodations can include seating arrangements, time for breaks, and voice strategies. The seating for kids with ADHD needs to be intentional and strategic. For a child with ADHD, everything is a potential distraction, and the term everything is no exaggeration. A flickering light, a tapping foot, an interesting ant, anything and everything can distract. Windows and doors have been found to be the sources of many problems in the classroom. In almost every article or journal that gives suggestions for classroom accommodations, experts recommend that those with ADHD should be seated as far away from doors and windows as possible. It's also recommended that these students are seated next to the teacher's desk or near positive role models. This discourages inattentiveness and promotes good behavior. Further classroom accommodations include small breaks within the lesson plan. An excerpt from an ADHD advocacy group says that depending on the student, these could include stretching, walking to the board to complete a task, or handing out assignments or materials. These breaks should consist of some form of movement, rather than remaining seated for an hour at a time. Active movement increases the ability to focus in many students with and without ADHD. Kids with ADHD should have every opportunity for physical activity, as having to listen to long, drawn-out instructions makes students squirrely. Speaking of directions, it is important that directions are clear and precise. And to be sure that a student grasps the concept, it's recommended that the teacher has the student repeat back the directions in order to solidify the idea. Complicated instructions become difficult to follow after a while, which is why it is important to keep things short and sweet. So far, these may seem like regular old classroom management ideas, and you wouldn't be wrong. These small changes help most students to succeed. ADHD also affects one's ability to plan. And to help remedy this, teachers could divide large projects into small parts. This is called scaffolding, and is considered to be a best practice of effective teaching. Large projects can seem to be big, unwieldy monsters. Small parts of a larger whole, however, allow students to see both the start and the end of a task, which can help to develop skills with time management and planning. This chunking of a project makes manageable parts that does not overwhelm a student. When a student becomes overwhelmed, they are more likely to act out, get distracted, or become a distraction to others. Like most humans, those suffering from ADHD respond well to positive encouragement. An excerpt from Dr. Edward Howell, a child psychologist, stresses the importance of this point. He says that when a child with attention deficit hyperactive disorder receives a drop or two of praise, it is like rain in the desert. Those who struggle with this particular disorder may not hear praise often, so when they finally do, it boosts their self-confidence and encourages them to continue with that approval-worthy behavior. When teachers notice that a child is slowly wandering off into their own imagination, one of the most effective ways to rein them back in is to simply say their name. Maybe by asking, "Timmy, what do you think of chapter 4? Or, "Timmy, what do you think of the author?" This allows the child to return to the classroom without feeling called out or shamed for their mistake. The teacher's way of speaking can influence whether a situation escalates or calms down. The most ineffective method of controlling ADHD behaviors is to respond with yelling or simply ignoring a child's behavior. Unfortunately, these are the methods too commonly used by adults who are frustrated with kids with ADHD, and I don't blame you. But it was found that yelling results in defiance. It was found to be the trigger for the escalation of challenging behavior. While researching the correct way to deal with inappropriate or undesirable behavior, I've come to realize that disciplining an ADHD child is a lot like training a dog. A journal written by Russell Barkley inspired this conclusion. Barkley gives a list of principles that he recommends that offer support in managing classroom behavior. He first starts by saying that rules and instructions provided must be clear, brief, and often delivered through more visible and external modes of presentation. And when it comes to consequences, consequences used to manage the behavior of hyperactive children must be delivered swiftly and immediately. And the consequences must be delivered just more frequently, not just more immediately. Sound familiar? But as you can see, these small changes can set a child up for success. The accommodations are not difficult. Teachers would not have to go to classes or get an additional degree to help these students learn better. By including students with ADHD in the classroom, the learning environment becomes diversified. Students of similar intellectual ability should have access to the same educational opportunities. In almost all private schools, all private schools rely on some form of academic testing. If you have two students who receive the same admission test scores, the child who has ADHD should not be denied the same opportunity for learning as the one who does not, simply because of their medical condition. It should be similar to how a school would not turn away a child who has a peanut allergy. Both are medical conditions. Both require certain accommodations. The purpose of education is to teach a student to think critically, and there should not be a barrier denying equal opportunity for learning. These accommodations would provide great help to those who need it. There are already solutions that decrease the manifestation of ADHD. Diet, nature, and exercise, along with medication, has been used to lower hyperactivity and sharpen focus for a long time. While these methods are effective, they should be viewed as an aid to classroom accommodations, rather than as the only solutions. To reiterate, ADHD is not a learning disability. It is a medical condition, and it should be regarded as such. These pricey classes and specialized staff are not necessary to help these students with their learning difference. This issue isn't talked about as often or as openly as it should be. Why should families keep issues like this a deep, dark secret? Schools who turn these kids away are not conceding with the purpose of education. By ostracizing these families, we're making a difficult situation even more difficult. These students need our love and support. We can support these families by removing the unnecessary stigma that is associated with ADHD. We can give support and encouragement. With a bit of support and encouragement, kids with ADHD can thrive in most school settings. Without these accommodations, I, for example, would have ended up drowning in schoolwork that had piled up while I had daydreaming. Sorry, what was I talking about again? Thank you.